Coast's most accurate forecast from the First Coast News Weather Team, certified by Weather Rate, sponsored by AC Designs.
Hello, everyone. We are closely watching the tropics. I'm meteorologist Lee Southwick. All right, so here's the breakdown. There is a low chance of tropical formation in the Gulf. Yes, the system is off to the east and really the southeast of us. That system is going to cross over Florida, and then once it moves into the Gulf of Mexico, it does have a chance of tropical development. It is a low chance right now. We have the 8 a.m. advisory from the National Hurricane Center, and they gave this system a 10% chance of developing within the next 2 days and a 30% chance of developing within the next 7 days. So this is a trough it's bringing this broad area of low pressure. You can see it's a disorganized cluster of showers and thunderstorms off the Atlantic coast of Florida. As it moves into the Gulf, conditions become a little bit more favorable for development. And we do see occasionally a bit of spin as it moves into the Gulf. You can see it kind of tries to organize a bit. So it's not out of the question for something to form, especially this time of year in the Gulf. We usually see the warm waters. If you have the low wind shear and not a lot of dust, you can get tropical activity out there. So again, not totally out of the question, but whether this forms or not, our impacts remain the same. We are seeing more rain out there. It's even tropical rain, heavy rain from this system today and again tomorrow and on Wednesday. We will have scattered to potentially numerous showers and thunderstorms, especially in the afternoon and the evening. As it moves into the Gulf, again, whether it develops or not, we're still going to see that risk of rain. So let's talk about its chance for development. Right now it's low because models don't have their act together. This is the GFS model, the American model, and notice as we approach Wednesday and Thursday, it shows something trying to form out kind of near the Louisiana coast area, Mississippi, Alabama, but it's very disorganized. So that is not a tropical depression or a tropical storm, but still it shows the heavy rain that will move into portions of the northern Gulf Coast. The European model now, this is very similar. As we approach Wednesday and Thursday, it kind of moves towards the northern Gulf Coast and not a lot happens with it. So it's still very disorganized, just bringing that risk of heavy rain. So this system is going to make it into the Gulf by late Tuesday, looks like the timing. And from there, we'll have to watch to see how it interacts with those warm Gulf waters. And again, all these other environmental conditions to see if it does actually try to form and organize into a tropical depression. But the risk is low of that right now because those models are not showing that. They're not really agreeing on any solid formation. So for us, as mentioned, we're going to have the heavier rain here at times and more thunderstorm activity. Our rainfall over the next 5 days, not too overwhelming. Rainfall totals around 1.5 inches, and the closer you get to the Gulf Coast, the higher those rainfall totals likely will become. Also, as you head south, portions of central and south Florida under a heavy rain risk and a flash flood risk that does extend along the Gulf Coast. So the Big Bend region seeing that, and then the northern Gulf Coast, places like New Orleans to coastal Mississippi, Biloxi, even over towards Mobile and Alabama. And then that will continue towards Pensacola, Panama City Beach, Destin, parts of the Panhandle, right along the Gulf Coast, just depending on where those heavy rain bands move in from this system. So again, for us, we will see some rain, but the flash flood risk really exists along the Gulf Coast and then into central and parts of South Florida. So for us, though, with the more numerous showers and thunderstorms, we will have weather impact alerts in effect from 2 o'clock until 8 o'clock today, tomorrow, and on Wednesday. We will have scattered thunderstorms with heavy rain and the frequent lightning. And we can't press this home enough. If you hear thunder, you have to get to shelter, because if you hear thunder, you're close enough to be struck by lightning. It does not have to be raining for lightning to strike. Lightning can strike up to 10 miles away from a storm system. So please, 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 if you are outdoors in the coming days, make sure to head inside if you do hear that thunder. And as mentioned, again, our rain chances are on the higher end over the coming days. Again, even Thursday, Friday into Saturday, still a good number of showers and thunderstorms in the afternoon. And of course, each and every day before we get those thunderstorms, we are hot and humid, very hot and humid. So back to the tropics, though, let's take a look at some of our conditions for tropical development. When we need no Saharan dust or low Saharan dust. And that's what this model is showing for the rest of the work week. Not a whole lot of dust out there over the Gulf. Dust kind of chokes out a hurricane and prevents it from forming. So we need dust to prevent tropical development. There's not a lot of dust out there. Another thing that we look at, the wind shear. If you have more wind shear, it's less likely to form a hurricane. It kind of shears and tears apart that hurricane. But here into next week, not a whole lot of wind shear either on the northern Gulf Coast. And of course, we need warm waters. Warm water is fuel for tropical systems, and waters are definitely warm enough in the Gulf. Look at that, 88 degrees for a water temperature there sitting, it looks like near Mobile Bay. So again, plenty of warm water. So if a tropical storm develops, the next name on the list is Dexter. We are not saying it will develop. We're just watching that chance. And again, the National Hurricane Center has that 30% chance of tropical development. So we have had 3 named storms so far. We actually have an update from Colorado State University on their hurricane forecast. Let's go to meteorologist Robert Speta now for more information on that new Colorado State forecast.
Colorado State University, which is one of the leaders in long-range tropical cyclone forecasting, has updated their 2025 hurricane season outlook to a slightly lower number, expecting 16 named storms now, 8 hurricanes and 3 major hurricanes. Now, this is slightly lower than what we've seen earlier in the season from their outlook, and there's a few reasons for this.
And so basically right now we're seeing stronger than average vertical wind shear over the Caribbean, which limits tropical cyclones as due to that change of wind speed with height, it kind of tilts the storms over and restricts their ability to grow.
That's Chandler Jenkins. He's an environmental scientist with CSU. Now, he emphasized to not let the current changes mislead you.
We're still kind of expecting an above average hurricane season as the models, long-term models are kind of expecting this kind of vertical wind shear to dissipate as we head into August. And we're still expecting the Atlantic, which is not as warm as it was last year, though it's still above average and still plenty warm enough to get strong tropical cyclones to form. And
so yes, still an above average hurricane season in the forecast. But remember, one of the most important notes is this.
I want to emphasize the point that it only takes one tropical cyclone in your area to make it kind of an active season. And so always have a plan, kind of, especially if you're in tropical or areas that are prone to these tropical cyclones, and always kind of be ready and listen to the National Hurricane Center and your local authorities.
We have more information on this and a look at the full interview at Hurricane Central on firstcoastnews.com. I'm meteorologist Robert Speta.
Thank you, Robert. So again, now we are watching for the possibility of our next system to form, but it's only a low chance, 10% chance of something developing within the next 2 days, 30% chance of something developing within the next 7 days. So we're going to watch as this moves across Florida. It will bring rounds of rain across the state of Florida, including here with our weather impact alert today and tomorrow and again on Wednesday. But by late Tuesday, we do expect it to be in the Gulf, and that's when we can start to see this system trying to organize. Right now, models don't really show it organizing. It just shows it being a blob of heavy rain and some gusty winds out there too. But it's something that we are, of course, watching closely because the Gulf can be a beast in the hurricane season and really cause storms to quickly form and strengthen. So we will watch out for that chance of a tropical depression or a tropical storm. And again, if one forms, it looks like it will most likely impact the northern Gulf Coast. That's where it would make landfall, but still bring heavy rain to portions of Florida as well. So low chance, but in the next 7 days, we will watch out for that 30% that did get bumped up today, and we'll see if it moves up anymore. So we will make sure to keep you updated with all of that information. In the meantime, it is July. If you look here on our hurricane frequency graph, we are past July 10th now. We are heading towards August. And once we enter August, things really do start to ramp up. So the season begins June 1st, and so far we've had 3 named storms. The peak of hurricane season is September 10th, but we usually say that you have not the peak, but higher frequency of hurricanes, the more active hurricane season, August, September, and into October. And you can see that here with our hurricane frequency graph. And then, of course, hurricane season doesn't end until November 30th. So meteorologist Robert Speta already talked to you about the new updated forecast from Colorado State University, but he also interviewed the director of the National Hurricane Center for this upcoming season. And let's take a listen to that now.
It's the 2025 hurricane season, and the National Hurricane Center has made some changes and improvements to the way warnings are issued and disseminated. This ranging from the size of the cone to the way we collect and distribute data from inside a hurricane. I got to talk to the National Hurricane Center Director Michael Brennan about these changes. So here's a look at that full interview. First and foremost thing on top of people's minds, like, as we head into the 2025 hurricane season, let's say I am somebody brand new to the Gulf Coast of Florida. What do you think are just some of the main things that they should, and I know it's a broad question, but you kind of, what are some of the main things that you think they should be ready for, prepare for, they should have in the back of their mind as we head through May and into June?
Yeah, for somebody who's moving to a hurricane prone area the first time, you really have to start out by understanding what your risk is. Do you live in an area where you're susceptible to storm surge? That could be on the coast of Duval County. It could be along the St. Johns River. Or do you live inland and freshwater flooding from heavy rainfall is your biggest threat? Everybody's susceptible to wind impacts and tornado impacts. There's also the threat of rip currents along the coast. So it's really about understanding what the risk is where you live and developing a plan to keep you and your family safe based on that risk. So the most important thing is to find out if you live in a storm surge evacuation zone, because if you do, you could be asked by local officials to leave your home. You need to have a plan for how you're going to leave, how you're going to go, where you're going to go, how you're going to get there. And it's important to remind people that you don't always have to drive hundreds of miles or out of the state of Florida to get to a safe place in advance of a hurricane. You really just need to drive out of that storm surge evacuation zone and get to a safe place, a shelter, the home of a friend or loved one, where you can safely ride out the storm. And that might only mean driving 10 or 20 miles inland away from that storm surge threat to get to a safe place. And the other thing is, again, identify your home structural risks. Are you in a mobile home where you might be asked to leave even for a tropical storm? Are you in a flood-prone area that might need to be evacuated near a creek or a stream? And then finally, you want to think about supply kit. You want to have a disaster supply kit handy, not just for tropical storms and hurricanes, but for any other emergency. Multiple days of food, water, batteries, medicine, charging devices for your phone, and just ways that your equipment and supplies that you're going to need to be self-sufficient for several days in the aftermath of a storm where you might not have power.
And to kind of carry off of what you were just talking about, as far as getting prepared, especially if a storm is right on your doorstep. I know last year we started with the experimented cone graphics, and this year you're carrying on them again. Is there any changes from last year? And could you talk about maybe some lessons learned from last year, especially since we did have multiple storms that had impacts well inland?
Yeah, you're right. The experimental cone, this is an example of it from Milton last year. We rolled that out in August, so it was around during Helene and Milton in particular, two of the more impactful hurricanes we had, both of which made landfall in Florida. So the experimental cone shows the extent of tropical storm and hurricane watches and warnings over inland areas. And you can see that in this case, almost the entire Florida peninsula was under some type of tropical storm or hurricane watch or warning. And again, showing that wind risk extends well outside the cone itself, which only tells you about where the center of the storm might go. You can see that Milton was a pretty big storm by the time it got to the Florida peninsula. It brought those impacts over a wide area. So we got a lot of positive feedback about the cone, the experimental one last year, so we're continuing it this season. The only real substantial change is this area where we have a hurricane watch and a tropical storm warning in effect. We added a little more clear legend about what that means, this pink and blue hatching area. But overall, we're going to continue it this year. Have it available on hurricanes.gov, continue to gather comments and feedback and decide how to make any additional changes or whether to make it operational after the 2025 hurricane season.
And I guess to even carry and build on top of that, because another thing that I noticed in our press release here was that the cone is getting smaller. So
Yeah.
can you just touch on, I think most people understand that means, the forecast is getting more accurate, but can you just
Yeah.
touch on kind of what goes into the cone of air and to kind of build even more on top of that with a smaller cone. What do you think are some of the forecasts? Because I've seen this personally, the forecast challenges that go with a smaller cone of air and communicating to the broader public.
Yeah, so the cone really represents the likely path of the center of the storm. So this is the forecast for Milton here across the Gulf and across Florida and in the Western Atlantic. And these dots represent our official forecast of where we expect the center to be. And then the cone tells you where the center will be about 2/3 of the time. But it's based on our track forecast errors over the previous 5 years. So we had a pretty successful year for forecasting track in 2024. We set record low errors on average. So as those numbers come into the calculation and we drop off the earlier year, the cone is going to be about 5% smaller. So really not a huge change, probably wouldn't even be really perceptible to most people. But it does indicate that on average, track forecast errors are a lot smaller than they were, say 20 years ago. If you look back at a cone from 2005, it's going to be much, much bigger. It'd probably cover most of the state of Florida. But that does create a messaging challenge in the fact that, people need to realize that the cone just tells you where the center is going to be, likely. It doesn't tell you where the impacts are going to be. So the cone is just sort of a broad scale look at where the center of the tropical storm or hurricane is forecast or is likely to be. The watches and warnings and the other information for wind and storm surge, flooding, tornadoes tell you about the hazards. It would be really difficult, if not impossible, to indicate all that hazard information on a single graphic. So that's why we have, different graphics that convey those different hazards and what those risks are.
And speaking of graphics and hazards, that really builds right into my next question, because, and this is actually a question not only for the general public, but also for me, the broadcaster. From your experience, because I could show somebody a satellite picture all day, and the big storms, people more or less ooh at it. They go, ooh, it's pretty. It doesn't translate to on the ground. So what do you think it's some of the most important things as broadcasters we should be doing to help relay some of that vital information? Because the cone is great, but, the Safford-Simpson scale, but I don't think sometimes that translates to storm surge. So I'll let you take it away, because I assume I'm kind of going with this, but it's a hard time sometimes relaying some of that vital information.
Yeah, the focus really needs to be on the hazards. And a lot of times those are covered by watches and warnings, like the wind ones you see here, the storm surge watches and warnings that highlight areas at risk for life-threatening storm surge inundation, flood watches and warnings, tornado watches and warnings. So again, because those hazards really vary in time and space during a storm, you have to focus on those hazards individually, but then also, collectively for the entire storm, for everybody, say in your viewing area, which includes people at the coast, people inland. They have different risks. So people need to understand what their risks are and really seek out the information that's related to what their risk profile is, or where they live, or where their business is located, to make sure they can get that vital information. The good news is that we can push information to people too. When we issue a storm surge or hurricane warning, that triggers a wireless emergency alert on people's cell phones based on where they're located. So if the warning is in effect for your area, you're going to get notified of that. People need to find their trusted sources of information, their broadcast meteorologist that they watch every day, who's going to be able to help guide them through the information that's coming out during a storm, which can be somewhat overwhelming at times, because there is a lot of information, not just coming from the National Hurricane Center or your local National Weather Service office, but in the larger sort of media ecosystem that includes not just traditional media, but social media. So it's important for people to have those trusted sources of information, find them now so that they're not looking for them during a storm.
And I'll jump into this question here, as I heard you mention the different ways things are getting pushed and social media, and you kind of already answered it, but just kind of ask in a broader scope. You started what in 2008 or late 2000s, right at the NHC? Yeah. What do you think from your perspective as relaying that information and the public's perspective is the biggest change in the way they get the information about hurricanes? But not only that, the way they kind of process it. For example, I know evacuations used to be a lot broader back then. Now it's a lot more concise. So just from your perspective, what do you think in the last almost 20 years has been the biggest change?
Yeah, I think, well, the way people consume information is rapidly changing. You live this every day. You're in traditional media, and there's still a lot of people that, especially in an emergency like a hurricane, turn on the television and watch their local television stations to get information. So we still try to get information to them through the media pool, through the broadcast meteorology community. But we also know people consume information on their phones. Some people don't ever watch television anymore. They have apps, they have social media. So we're trying to push information out through places like live streams and other social media platforms, short videos, to, again, we're not going to get we're not going to be able to provide someone every piece of information they need about a hurricane in a 1-minute reel that we're going to post on Instagram, but we can at least raise awareness and then encourage them to go seek out information through some other channel by coming to our website, looking to their local media, connecting with their local government officials. So it's a way to try to reach people where they are and then try to get to point them to places where they can get more comprehensive information. So again, you're right, we can provide a lot more detail now. You go back to when I started here at NHC in 2008, we didn't have a watch or warning for storm surge. We weren't able to highlight those areas specifically at risk of life-threatening inundation. Now we can, and as you mentioned, evacuation zones have become a lot more refined. It's not just a whole big chunk of a county. Now it might just be one small piece of a barrier island or an area along the St. Johns River. So as information has gotten more precise, in some ways it's become a little more difficult for people to consume and understand. So we just have to keep making sure that we can get our voice out there with the authoritative information, and that across sort of the weather and hurricane enterprise, we amplify those sources of authoritative information, whether it's coming from us in the National Weather Service or from state and local government officials that are telling people where to evacuate and how to get ready for an event.
Thank you. And one other question I had here, and is almost on the line of improving technology, is that nowadays we have drones coming in off of planes. We have the sail drone out there. How are these new different recon and areas of technology improving your forecast?
Yeah, a lot of it goes back to the data from the Hurricane Hunter aircraft. So, for example, you can look, here's a radar picture from one of the NOAA Hurricane Hunters flying through the storm out over the ocean where we don't have radar data. All of the ground-based radars are on land. So this is getting us data here that's giving us a view of what the storm looks like from the inside for our forecasters to look at. But this radar data, the precipitations, the structure, the wind field, is all getting into the forecast models that help us predict the track and the intensity of a storm, which then directly plays into where the storm surge is going to be, the heavy rainfall, the wind. So all the aircraft reconnaissance data that come from the Hurricane Hunters going into the models improve those track and intensity forecasts by about 10 to 20%. And that's really been a big change in recent years. And it's also helped us to improve our forecast of rapidly intensifying storms. And if you look back at, say the storms from 2024, we had Helene and Milton in particular that both underwent rapid intensification before landfall. We're out and now actually able to make some of those more aggressive intensity forecasts that we wouldn't have been able to make, say, in 2008 or 9. We just wouldn't have had the confidence to forecast a storm to strengthen by 30 or 40 miles per hour in a 24-hour period. Now we are able to issue those more aggressive forecasts, which get us into the right expectation for setting the level of what types of hazards people might have to be dealing with the storm.
Wow. Thank you, Michael. One last question. Is if there's anything I haven't may have mentioned here for you that you think that heading into the 2025 hurricane season that people absolutely should be at least aware of as we get ready for this upcoming tropical year?
Well, that it doesn't take a hurricane or a major hurricane affecting your area directly to cause substantial life-threatening impacts, especially from freshwater flooding, from heavy rainfall. Has almost nothing to do with how strong a storm is from a wind perspective. A tropical depression, a weak tropical storm can produce life-threatening flooding. And that's been the biggest killer in the United States in tropical storms and hurricanes over the last 10 or so years. It just matters how hard it rains and how long it rains in a particular location. And the other thing I'll touch on is just post-storm safety. We've seen a substantial number of post-storm fatalities in recent years in tropical storms and hurricanes, especially after major hurricanes. When you have long duration power outages, you think about the aftermath of a hurricane in Florida in August or September with no power. It's going to be really hot. People aren't going to have air conditioning. People succumb to heart attacks, other medical issues, just accidents that occur from cleaning up or driving around in an environment after a storm. We lose a lot of people to car accidents. So just a reminder that you don't want to just survive the storm itself. You need to also survive the aftermath, and don't come back to evacuated areas until you've been told it's safe to do so by your local officials.
That's a good point, because we always seem like we always prepare for that first wave, and then no one really thinks about the weeks afterwards.
Yeah.
So really good point there, Mike. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with me here, Dr. Brennan from the National Hurricane Center. I know you got a busy day, so I'll let you get about it. But yeah, thank you so much for taking and answering a couple of my questions. I really appreciate it.
Great to talk to you. Thanks.
Thanks.